He boarded a plane with nothing but a diaper bag, a sleepy infant, and the hope of a quiet flight. But moments later, a flight attendant spilled scalding hot coffee onto his baby boy and refused to apologize. Was it just a tragic accident or something more chilling beneath the surface? What the crew didn't know was that someone powerful was watching from just 2 rows behind. Why was this calm, black father treated with such suspicion? Why did no one rush to help when his baby screamed? And most of all, what happens when a man chooses dignity over rage and the world is forced to reckon with it? This is not just a story about a flight gone wrong. It's about how stillness can spark a movement, how quiet strength can shatter silence, and how a child's cry became the call for justice across an entire airline. So grab your seat, take a breath, and ask yourself, what would you have done if this story moves you? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel so more voices like Malik's are heard. Let's begin. The hum of the cabin was soft and steady, like the lull of a distant river. Outside the small oval window, streaks of early morning sun pushed through pale clouds, painting the sky in bruised lavender and silver. Monarch Sky Flight 604 had just leveled off from its ascent, the engines quieting into a low, measured purr. Malik Rowan adjusted the collar of his soft gray sweater and shifted slightly in his seat. Next to him, nestled in a sky-blue blanket patterned with yellow moons. His son, Ezra, let out a small sigh and continued sleeping. The child's chest rose and fell with the kind of rhythm that made time pause. 9 months old and already resilient. Ezra had fought off a persistent cold earlier that week. Malik hadn't been sure if they should fly, but the doctors had cleared them, and Ezra's breathing had returned to a whisper instead of a wheeze. Still, he checked on him often. His fingers brushed gently along the curve of the baby's cheek, as if confirming, again, that everything was all right. The first-class cabin wasn't full, only a few passengers scattered across the rows, some lost in their devices, others sipping coffee behind sunglasses too large for the early hour. Row 5, where Malik sat, was tucked toward the middle. He liked that. It gave him just enough privacy while keeping them close to the crew if anything went wrong, and Malik was the kind of man who always thought 3 steps ahead, not because he was anxious, but because the world had taught him it was safer that way. Across the aisle, a man in his 50s sat reading a paper copy of the Aviation Review. He wore a navy blazer over a dark brown turtleneck, his graying hair trimmed neatly above his ears. Occasionally, his eyes drifted over the top of the paper and lingered a beat longer than chance would allow. Malik noticed, but he didn't let on. He had grown used to the quiet scanning that happened when he boarded first class with a baby, especially a black man with no wedding ring and a calm, serious face. People wondered, they guessed, some assumed, but Malik never offered explanations. His life was not a puzzle for strangers to solve. Brent Halvers appeared at the front of the cabin with the practiced ease of someone who had been in the air far too long. His crisp white shirt was tight around the shoulders, and his lips carried the faint curl of someone bored with politeness. He didn't smile as he began checking the cabin. Malik sat straighter when Brent reached their row. He offered a polite nod, the kind that conveyed neither friendliness nor submission, just acknowledgement. Brent's eyes flicked to Ezra. A baby in first, he muttered. It was barely above a whisper, but Malik heard. He didn't respond. Instead, he adjusted the small pillow behind Ezra's head and reached for the bottle in his side pocket, warming it slightly in his hand. Not every fight deserved breath. From across the aisle, the man with the paper lowered it halfway and said nothing. His brow furrowed, but he stayed silent. Brent walked off. Malik breathed through his nose. A quiet, even stream. He wasn't going to let that ruin this flight. Not this time. He had worked too hard to be here to bring his son home to meet his grandmother for the first time. There were layers of meaning in this trip, layers of memory, of healing. The last time Malik had flown this route was with his wife. Her laughter had filled these cabins back then. Her voice had once reached into the hollow spaces in him and made them light. She would have clapped softly, seeing Ezra bundled in his travel onesie, cheeks full and eyes wide with wonder. She would have shut down Brent in 3 sentences, flat. The intercom crackled. A mild voice announced they had reached cruising altitude and the beverage service would begin shortly. Ezra stirred a little. Malik rocked his seat gently, eyes never leaving his son's face. The cart rolled forward. Brent again. This time, his smile was thin and taut. He handed drinks with the automatic grace of routine. When he reached Malik, he paused. "Coffee?" he asked flatly. Malik hesitated. His instinct told him no, but sleep had been short, and the day ahead would be long. "Yes, please," he said. Brent didn't look at him as he poured, from behind, a light tremble, a sudden dip in cabin pressure. The plane jerked slightly. Not much. Enough for those used to turbulence to blink and look up. Brent tilted the pot a fraction too far. Some liquid dripped onto his hand. His face tensed. The cup slipped. It didn't hit Malik. It didn't even hit Malik's lap. It spilled directly onto Ezra. In an instant, the cabin filled with a sound that sliced the air. Ezra's scream. Malik's hands were there instantly, tearing off the blanket, lifting his son, cradling him as steam rose from his clothes. The coffee wasn't boiling, but it was hot enough to scald. Passengers turned. Brent stepped back. He shouldn't have been in the way, he said too loudly. Silence fell. Ezra cried, sharp, gasping cries. Malik's voice, though, never rose. He rocked his son gently, his lips close to the baby's forehead, whispering words no one could hear. Across the aisle, the man in the blazer put down his paper. He reached into his breast pocket and touched something. A badge glinted briefly under the overhead light, and just like that, the air in row 5 changed. The silence was no longer passive. It was watching. It was listening. It was about to speak. The cabin smelled of scorched fabric and coffee. It wasn't overpowering, but the scent lingered just long enough to mingle with the sharp cries of a child in pain. Ezra's sobs cut through the manufactured serenity of first class, making it impossible for anyone to look away. Malik Rowan held his son tightly against his chest. His heart thudded in sync with Ezra's panicked breathing. The baby's onesie was damp, his tiny legs red with heat, though thankfully not blistering. Still, the trauma had already settled deep in the boy's body, trembling through every nerve. Malik's hands moved on instinct. He removed Ezra's socks and gently fanned the skin beneath them, searching for the full extent of the burn. As he did, a storm of emotion pressed at the walls of his mind, fury, grief, guilt. All of it wanted to explode out of him, but he couldn't. Not here, not now, not with Ezra watching his every move, learning what it meant to be calm under fire. Someone called for ice. A passenger, maybe, or the younger flight attendant from the back, the one with soft eyes and a steadier tone. Malik didn't even look up to see. A second later, A cold compress was handed into his field of vision. No words, just a hand. Malik took it and pressed it gently against Ezra's legs. The baby whimpered, then clutched at Malik's collar, as if trying to crawl into his chest to hide from the world. Brent Halvers still stood at the head of the cabin, staring blankly at them. His hands were clenched, not in remorse, but in stubborn disbelief. He turned toward the galley without a word and disappeared behind the curtain. Malik said nothing, not to Brent, not to the passengers, not even to the attendant who had helped him. He focused on Ezra, keeping his breathing low and steady, his hand rocking gently over the baby's back. His son needed a lighthouse right now. He needed stillness. But inside Malik, the tide was rising. He could feel the edge of it now. The dangerous rim where restraint meets rage. He'd lived there before in courtrooms, in boardrooms, in meetings where he had to smile through insults wrapped in polished phrases. But this was different. This was Ezra. Across the aisle, Alden Reyes sat motionless. He had folded his paper and placed it on the seat beside him. One hand rested on his thigh, the other lightly gripping a leather wallet that bulged not with credit cards, but with federal authority. He had seen enough. Still, he didn't speak. Not yet. Not until the moment mattered most. The silence in the cabin had taken on a strange quality. It wasn't quiet anymore. It was charged. Passengers were watching Malik, waiting to see if he would shout, if he would scream, if he would break. Because that's what people expect when a black man is pushed too far. But Malik didn't move. Not out of fear, out of calculation. He looked down at Ezra and whispered, barely audible even to himself, "You're safe, I promise. I'll carry this burn for you." Time passed slowly. Eventually, Brent returned from the galley. His face was pale now, his shirt slightly wrinkled, like he had splashed water on it to compose himself. He walked with practiced posture, shoulders high, chin squared, and when he spoke, it was with a forced tone of control. "Sir," he said flatly, "we've administered first aid. If you feel the child needs medical attention, we can alert the gate crew in advance." Malik didn't respond. Brent shifted uncomfortably. "I understand it was upsetting, but it was turbulence, not negligence. That was the moment." Alden Reyes stood. Brent turned, confused. He clearly hadn't registered the older man behind the newspaper as anything more than a quiet businessman. Alden's voice was level, clear, authoritative. Your cart was not secured. Your hand was not braced. And your language toward the passenger and his child was documented. Brent blinked. "I'm sorry." Documented, Alden reached into his blazer and pulled out a small black case. He opened it, revealing an FAA identification badge gleaming under the overhead light. "My name is Alden Reyes. I'm a director for the Federal Aviation Oversight Bureau. I was seated in this cabin for a mid-year compliance audit. I will be filing a full incident report upon landing, including your conduct before and after the spill." For the first time. Brent looked unsettled. Passengers leaned in. Malik didn't look up. He pressed his cheek against Ezra's and kept his voice low. Ezra had stopped crying, though his breath still hitched from time to time. He was exhausted from the shock. Every now and then, a tear clung to his eyelashes, suspended like a crystal too proud to fall. Brent tried to recover. "I wasn't aware there was an audit." "You weren't supposed to be," Alden replied. "It's meant to show how crews behave when they think no one's watching." A hush swept the cabin again. Jonas Fields, the younger flight attendant, appeared from the economy curtain. Eyes wide, he had overheard. His gaze darted between Brent and Alden, then toward Malik and Ezra. "Sir," Jonas said gently to Malik, "do you need anything else for your son? We have aloe. I can bring extra ice, a pillow, anything." Malik looked up. For the first time since the incident, he made eye contact with another crew member. Jonas didn't look away. Malik nodded once. "Thank you. The aloe. Please." Jonas turned and walked briskly down the aisle. Brent opened his mouth again, perhaps to salvage some dignity, but Alden spoke first. "I'd suggest you sit down and write a full account of what happened. Everything. Now." Brent walked away. Malik's hands trembled slightly, not with weakness, but with the adrenaline of holding back. He adjusted Ezra again, gently placing the cool compress against the baby's thigh. He knew what would come next. Corporate statements, PR damage control, a quiet offer of airline credit, maybe even a thin apology drafted by legal. But Malik Rowan wasn't interested in redemption for Brent. He was interested in something else entirely. Across the aisle, Alden sat again, quietly taking out his phone. He pressed record and whispered into the mic, "Flight 604, Monarch Sky. Incident log begins. 1 infant injured by unsecured hot beverage. 1 crew member failed protocol. 1 father calm. Composed refused to break. Investigation pending." The truth had begun its journey. And Malik, cradling Ezra in his arms, knew deep down that something larger had just awakened. Not just in the cabin, but in the country. The hum of the engines returned to the foreground, but for Malik Rowan, everything else had gone quiet. Not in sound, in meaning. He could still hear the subtle clink of cups in the galley, the whisper of fingers scrolling through tablets, even the soft sigh of the air vents over row 5, but none of it felt real anymore. He sat with Ezra curled against his chest. The baby's breathing slower now, more even, though not quite peaceful. Malik's shirt was damp where Ezra's tears had soaked through the cotton. His own body ached from holding the child so tightly for so long, but he didn't shift. This wasn't a moment for comfort. It was a moment for remembering. He looked down at Ezra's small hands, one of them still clutching the edge of his sweater. He thought about the hands that had hurt him not just today, but historically, systemically. How many cups had spilled on people like them, and how many were told it was just turbulence, a child gets burned, and the first reaction is deflection, excuses, policy. It was never about the spill. It was about the system behind the tray. Malik closed his eyes briefly and let his mind drift back to when Ezra was born. The hospital room had been quiet. His wife had fallen asleep after delivery, exhausted and radiant. Malik had held Ezra for the first time at 3:08 a.m. The nurse had left the room. The machines beeped quietly, and in that stillness, Malik had whispered something into his son's ear. "I'll carry the fire for you." He hadn't known what he meant, not entirely, but he'd felt it, the weight, the promise, the responsibility, to raise a black child in a world that still couldn't tell the difference between inconvenience and injustice. Now, as he looked down at Ezra's red skin and damp lashes, the promise echoed back like a bell in a canyon. He had to carry the fire again. Jonas Fields returned to the row carrying a small travel-sized bottle of aloe vera gel, a fresh compress, and a folded towel. He knelt carefully beside Malik without saying a word, then offered the supplies like sacred objects. Malik nodded once. "Thank you," he said quietly. Jonas hesitated, then spoke in a soft voice. "I just want you to know, I saw everything. You weren't in the way. Your son wasn't. Brent wasn't even looking. He was distracted. He poured too fast." Malik didn't respond right away. He applied the aloe with slow, gentle hands. Ezra stirred but didn't cry. Jonas remained kneeling, unsure whether to speak again. "I know it doesn't fix it," he added, voice trembling now, "but I'm sorry. I'm so sorry he did that to you both." Malik finally looked him in the eyes. The young attendant's face was sincere, pale, a little shaken, and Malik saw something there that he hadn't expected. Not guilt, grief, maybe not for himself, but for something larger, for a world he hadn't fully realized he was a part of until now. Malik gave a small nod. "You're not responsible for his actions," he said, "but thank you for showing up after." Jonas swallowed hard, then stood and quietly stepped away. Across the aisle, Alden Reyes had returned to his reading position, though the paper remained unopened. Instead, he stared ahead, brows furrowed in thought. Occasionally, his fingers tapped against his thigh, like someone building a case in his mind. Malik wondered what the man would write in his report. Would it just be about a burn and a breach of protocol? Or would he include the silence that followed, the kind that screamed when no one else would a few rows ahead? Brent remained out of sight behind the galley curtain. Malik leaned back slightly, easing his own tired muscles. He felt the quiet return, this time not as a weight, but as space. Space to breathe, to reflect, to feel. His thoughts turned to his wife again, not just the memory of her laugh or the softness of her touch, but the things she used to say. "They don't need us to be angry," she'd told him once. "They need us to be predictable. That's how they stay in control. But when we are calm and clear, when we stand with grace, that's when they get nervous." She had understood something deep about the power of presence, about how resistance didn't always look like fists in the air. Sometimes it looked like silence that refused to bow, like truth that didn't shout. Malik had lived by that, even after she was gone, and now it was his turn to teach Ezra, not with lectures, with example. He took out his phone and opened the Notes app. He began to type, slowly, one line at a time. Flight 604. Incident. Hot coffee poured onto my infant son by flight attendant Brent Halvers. Attendant claimed turbulence, but cart was stable. Other witness present. Child injured. Crew member walked away. Only one staff offered help, documenting now in case airline attempts cover-up. He paused, then added one more line. "I am not here for money. I am here for the truth." When he looked up, Alden was watching him. Their eyes met. Alden gave the smallest nod. Malik nodded back. Not an alliance, a recognition. Two men who understood that change doesn't always arrive in protest marches or headlines. Sometimes it begins in aisle 5 of a morning flight, with a child's cry and a father who chooses not to rage but to remember. A soft voice came over the intercom. Jonas again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will begin our descent into Elmsway International shortly. Please ensure your seat backs are upright and tray tables are stored." Malik felt the subtle shift in the plane as it tilted downward, the ground growing closer. He whispered to Ezra. "We're almost home," but he wasn't just talking about Virginia. He was talking about justice. Something was landing soon, not just a plane, but a reckoning. and it would be gentle, it would be firm, it would be undeniable. The plane began its descent with a low mechanical sigh, the wings leveling into a slow glide toward Elmsway International. Through the window beside Malik Rowan, morning had unfolded into full daylight. The clouds were thinning, revealing neat grids of roads below, framed by slivers of sunlit rivers and early summer trees. Malik adjusted the baby sling, careful not to disturb Ezra, who had finally drifted into a fragile sleep. His son's breath warmed the skin of his chest, soft and rhythmic, but the tension in Malik's jaw hadn't eased. His hand, resting on Ezra's back, curled into a slow fist. The announcement came again over the intercom, this time from the flight's captain, a polished voice, calm and rehearsed. Ladies and gentlemen, as we begin our final approach into Elmsway, we ask that you remain seated with your seat belts fastened. Cabin crew, prepare for landing. It was the first time Malik had heard the captain's voice, and he couldn't help but wonder if the man had been told what happened in his cabin, or if, like so many in command, he had been shielded by layers of silence and plausible deniability. Across the aisle, Alden Reyes slowly closed the black leather folder he had been writing in and tucked it into his carry-on bag. His face was composed but sharp, like someone who had already decided what came next. Behind them, the rustle of papers and clicks of belts filled the cabin. Passengers avoided eye contact with Malik, not out of shame, but discomfort. A few looked toward him, their gazes heavy with things they wanted to say but wouldn't, and that was always the way of it. They would text about it, they would whisper about it over drinks later, but here, in this pressurized tube of artificial civility, truth felt too raw to speak. Jonas Fields returned one last time to row 5, kneeling gently beside Malek. "Sir," he said softly, "if there's anything you need when we land, paramedics, a gate agent, medical support, just say the word. I'll stay with you." Malek looked at him for a long second. It wasn't that he didn't appreciate the offer. It was that he was calculating again, running options, risks, outcomes. If he said yes, the airline might spin it, frame it as a minor incident, well handled. If he said no, he might be accused of not caring enough. This was the trap, always the trap. Black fathers were either angry or absent, never allowed to be what he was: present, composed, protective, and unyielding. "I'll request paramedics," Malik said evenly, "and I want the gate supervisor brought to the jet bridge before I disembark. Not later, not after an internal review. I want him waiting." Jonas hesitated, then nodded firmly. "Yes, sir." "And one more thing," Malik added. "Yes, I want Brent to stay on this plane until that meeting happens." Jonas's eyes widened a fraction, but he didn't argue. "I'll see to it." He stood, gave Malik a look of quiet respect, and walked to the front. The plane dipped slightly again, the runway now visible outside a wide gray ribbon stretching into the horizon. Ezra stirred, his eyes fluttered. Malik stroked the side of his face gently. "We're safe," he whispered. "We're safe, little one." But even as he said it, he knew the truth. They were only safe if people stayed watching, if people didn't forget the moment they exited through the gate. The wheels touched down with a soft but decisive thud. The cabin lurched forward slightly. Passengers reached for the armrests, some letting out quiet breaths of relief. The plane slowed, taxiing now. Malik sat straight, Ezra secured in his sling, both hands resting calmly on the child's back. Brent Halvers reappeared near the galley, his lips tight, his eyes flicking toward Malik for the briefest moment before looking away again. He stayed near the door but did not speak. Jonas returned and bent low near Alden, whispering quickly. Alden nodded once. Then he pulled out a small notepad and began writing again. As the plane reached the gate and the familiar chime rang overhead, Malik felt time stretch. This wasn't just a landing, it was a beginning. The cabin door opened. Outside, on the jet bridge, Malik saw a man in a navy vest and lanyard standing with two paramedics. The man had the look of someone who had been summoned quickly, hair out of place, tie slightly crooked, a tablet clutched in one hand. Jonas approached Malik's row. "They're ready for you, sir." Malik stood slowly, adjusting the sling so Ezra's head rested just under his chin. He looked down at his son one last time before stepping into the aisle. He walked past Brent without a word. The attendant didn't meet his gaze. Alden followed close behind. Jonas stepped out first and greeted the waiting staff. "This is Mr. Rowan," he said, "and his son, Ezra." The gate supervisor extended a hand, then hesitated, unsure whether to offer it after what he had heard. Malik didn't take it. "I'll speak clearly," Malik said, his voice calm but undeniable. "Your employee poured scalding coffee on my 9-month-old son. He then walked away without apology, without assistance, and attempted to blame turbulence. A federal observer on this flight witnessed it all." Alden stepped forward, presenting his badge. "I can confirm. I've already initiated a compliance file. I'll be conducting an independent inquiry on behalf of the FAA. The supervisor's face turned pale. We weren't told there was an audit. You were never meant to be." Alden interrupted. "That's how we test accountability." The two paramedics stepped forward, assessing Ezra with professional calm. Malik shifted to allow them access. One of them, a young woman with amber eyes, gently touched the baby's leg. "No blistering," she said, "but mild first-degree burn. We'll treat him here or transport him." "Your call, sir." "We'll stay," Malik replied. "For now." She nodded and got to work. The supervisor shifted nervously. "Mr. Rowan, the airline is very sorry." "Not yet," Malik interrupted. "You'll apologize later, publicly. For now, I need a written statement of acknowledgement that the incident occurred, and a confirmation that the flight attendant will be grounded pending investigation." The man blinked. I'll need clearance. You'll need integrity," Malik said evenly. "Start there, behind him." A crowd of passengers filtered into the terminal, many watching with sidelong glances, none stepping forward, until one voice broke the line. It came from a woman in her 60s. White hair tied back, travel cardigan over a floral dress. She walked up slowly, her carry-on trailing behind her, and said, "I saw it happen. I want to give a statement, too. That wasn't turbulence. That was carelessness and cruelty." Malik turned toward her. Surprised, she gave a soft smile. "No child deserves that," she added. Then another voice behind her. "I saw it, too." A younger man in glasses said, "Me too." A third added. One by one, witnesses emerged, and something shifted in the air again. This was no longer one man's word against silence. This was becoming undeniable, and Malik knew then justice had stepped off the plane with him. Not through fire, but through clarity, through people who chose not to look away. The cool air of the terminal brushed against Malik Rowan's skin as he stepped fully into the arrivals corridor of Elmsway International. holding Ezra close against him. The chaos of the airport was already beginning to fold around them, announcements echoing, suitcase wheels humming, reunions murmuring in every direction. But for Malik, the world had narrowed. Every sound felt distant, every voice diluted. He walked with purpose, his spine straight, gaze fixed ahead, behind him. Alden Reyes and Jonas Fields kept pace, while Reed Collier, the gate supervisor, struggled to keep up, one hand holding his tablet, the other wiping nervous sweat from his brow. Malik didn't speak to any of them. He didn't have to. The moment they exited the restricted area, the airport's incident response team was waiting by a side wall, 3 people in navy vests with Monarch Sky logos embroidered on the chest. One of them, a woman in her late 40s with sharp eyes and perfectly controlled posture, stepped forward first. "Mr. Rowan," she asked, voice crisp. Malik nodded once. "I'm Dr. Reena Patel," she said, Chief of Ethics and Safety Compliance. "I was informed there was an in-flight injury involving your child and one of our crew." "It wasn't an injury," Malik replied, not raising his voice. "It was negligence, and silence, and denial." She held his gaze. "I understand. Would you be willing to speak with us in a more private space?" Malik looked around. Dozens of passengers were now watching from a distance. Some of them were filming with their phones. A security officer lingered nearby, radio in hand, unsure if he was meant to intervene. Malik turned back to Reena. "No, we stay here, in the open." A flash of something unreadable crossed her face. Then she nodded. "Very well." She motioned for her team to stand down. Jonas stepped beside Malik again, eyes scanning the gathering crowd. "If you'd like me to call your family, I can assist," he offered. Malik glanced down at Ezra, who had drifted back to sleep. His cheek nestled against his father's chest. "My mother's already waiting outside," he replied. "I'll bring her in when it's time." Dr. Patel stepped closer. "Mr. Rowan, I'd like to first acknowledge what happened and how serious it is. Our crew is trained to manage situations like this, and from what I understand, protocol was not followed. That's a generous way of putting it," Malik said. Her face remained composed. "We'll be launching a full internal investigation." "You don't need an investigation," Malik said, his voice low but steady. "You need to take responsibility. Today." A ripple of movement stirred at the edge of the crowd. Reporters. Word was spreading. A local journalist from Elmsway Daily had appeared with a microphone in hand, standing just outside the perimeter of onlookers. Malik saw her but didn't flinch. He took one small step forward. "My son was burned because a crew member mishandled hot coffee and then walked away without offering help or even an apology," he said clearly, not raising his voice, but letting it carry. "We were treated like a problem instead of passengers, and if it weren't for one kind crew member and a federal compliance officer who happened to be on board, this would have been covered up quietly." Gasps and murmurs rose around them. Malik looked at the camera without hesitation. "This isn't about me. It's about how systems protect themselves at the cost of dignity, and how quickly people move on when a black child is hurt." Jonas shifted beside him, eyes glassy. Alden Reyes stepped forward, lifting a badge again. "I've submitted the preliminary report to my division head," he announced, "and I will personally ensure that this does not get buried. There will be oversight. There will be accountability." Reena Patel nodded. "I welcome external investigation," she said. and I will recommend the immediate suspension of the crew member in question." "That's a start," Malik replied. Then his voice softened, and he looked down at Ezra. "But your apology isn't for me." He turned. From behind the crowd, Brent Halvers had been escorted out by 2 airline employees. His face was pale, his jaw clenched. He looked less defiant now, more stunned. Malik stared at him in silence. For a long moment, Brent didn't move. Then, under the weight of too many eyes and the awareness that something had shifted beyond his control, he stepped forward and spoke. I didn't mean to hurt your kid," he said stiffly. "It was an accident." "You didn't help him," Malik said quietly. "That was the real wound." Brent looked down, hands fidgeting at his sides. Malik gave a slow breath and turned away. The moment didn't need more. It had already said enough. Rena stepped back toward the crowd and addressed them all. "As the Chief of Ethics for Monarch Sky Airlines, I want to offer a formal apology to Mr. Rowan and his family. This incident does not reflect our standards, and we will cooperate fully with all federal oversight to ensure this never happens again." The crowd was silent. Then, slowly, one by one, a few people began to clap, not a celebration, a recognition. Malik didn't smile. He didn't need to. Instead, he walked past the clapping toward the automatic doors where his mother stood waiting, her arms outstretched and trembling with relief. She took Ezra gently from his chest, kissing the boy's forehead and whispering prayers through her tears. Malik rested a hand on her shoulder. "Come on," he said softly. "Let's go home." Behind him, the terminal buzzed back to life. Security redirected traffic. Reporters began making calls. Airline staff scattered to closed doors and silent offices. But something had been left behind in that terminal space. Something sacred. A line that had been drawn. And the storm that once brewed quietly inside Malik had now passed through the public air. No longer private. No longer ignorable. Justice had taken its first breath, and it would not be silenced again. At exactly 8:47 a.m., the phone rang in a corner office on the 34th floor of Monarch Sky's corporate headquarters in Arlington, Virginia. It wasn't the receptionist. It wasn't a department manager. It was a direct line. A line that rarely rang except during crisis escalation or executive-level emergencies. And it rang with a rhythm that meant only one thing: something was wrong, and someone important was already watching. Elliot Vance, Monarch Sky's chief operating officer, picked up the phone without looking away from his monitor. "This is Vance," he said crisply. There was a pause. Then a female voice, sharp and composed. "We have a situation," said Rena Patel. Elliot finally turned. "Go on. I'm on site at Elmsway. Flight 604 arrived 23 minutes ago. A black male passenger, Malik Rowan, traveling with his infant son, was burned during service, or rather, his son was, by a flight attendant. Hot coffee, no apology, no aid." Elliot stood slowly from his desk, his jaw tensing. And the incident was witnessed by a federal compliance officer, Alden Reyes. He was seated 2 rows behind. He already filed a preliminary complaint with the FAA. Elliot's eyes darkened. "Jesus, that's not all," Rena continued. "Passengers are coming forward publicly, including at least one elderly white woman who confirmed the flight attendant's indifference. There's media on site now. We couldn't get ahead of it." Elliot crossed to the window, looking out over the city. "Has legal been notified they're scrambling?" Rena said. But the family refused a private space. They demanded the conversation stay public. And now social media's lit up. Hashtags are forming. The father's name is already trending. Elliot closed his eyes. How bad is it? Worse than optics? Rena replied, This one feels different. It's not a viral outburst or a meltdown. It's quiet, composed. The man didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He just stood there, holding his child, telling the truth. And people listened. There was a long silence. Then Elliot turned back toward his desk. Where's the crew member grounded at Elmsway? Pending investigation. I made the call. Good. He hung up the phone, then tapped a button on his desk intercom. Get Mara in here. He told his assistant, now. Within 60 seconds, Mara Jennings, Vice President of Communications, stepped into the office. She had seen enough mid-air emergencies and corporate scandals to know when a storm was brewing. What's the fire? She asked, settling into a chair. Elliot tossed her a tablet. Flight 604. Passenger complaint. A black child was burned by coffee. Attendant didn't help. A federal official witnessed it. Media's already involved. Passenger refused private handling. It's about to go nuclear. Mara's fingers flew over the screen. Videos, posts, one shot of Malik standing in the terminal, calm and unreadable, his baby nestled in a sling against his chest. No anger, just quiet gravity. This man is a problem for us, she said. Why? Because he didn't rage, he didn't collapse, he showed composure, integrity. That's the most dangerous kind of witness. He's not chasing a payout. He's holding a mirror. She stood abruptly. We need a full board briefing. Elliot didn't argue. Get started, he said, and get the general counsel looped in. We're not waiting for this to burn down our brand. Mara left without another word. Within the hour, the boardroom on the 36th floor had filled. 12 executives, 2 legal representatives, 1 PR strategist, and silence. The screen at the end of the long conference table played muted footage from a local news outlet. Malik's face on the screen, partially turned, his son cradled close. The Chiron read, Father speaks out after infant burned on Monarch Sky flight. Let's talk exposure, the general counsel said. Federal investigation pending, said one lawyer. FAA complaint already logged. If mishandling is confirmed and the crew's response was inadequate, we're looking at fines, sanctions, possibly even a civil suit if the family pursues it, and public reaction, another board member asked. Mara tapped the screen. Skyrocketing, multiple posts across platforms, high engagement. He's being framed as the face of quiet resistance. He's not politicized. He's not aggressive. That's why people are rallying behind him. Parents, advocates, journalists. And she clicked again. At least one senator just retweeted the video. That landed hard. A weight fell over the room. Then Elliot spoke. We either get ahead of this or we get buried. A hand went up. Do we settle too early? Mara replied. We offer accountability first, suspension, review, public statement. Then we initiate contact through a neutral liaison. But we don't make this about silencing him. That will backfire. And what if he goes public with more? Then we listen. Elliot nodded slowly. We need to know who this man is, where he works, what he values. We don't fight fire with suppression. We study his story and find out how to honor the truth while protecting the airline. The general counsel sighed. I never thought I'd see the day where silence was more powerful than shouting. Mara stared at the screen. That's the thing, she said softly. He wasn't silent. He just refused to perform rage. And in that refusal, he became impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, miles away in a quiet living room in the southeast D, Malik sat on the floor with Ezra curled in his lap, a soft blanket draped across them. His mother, Lillian, sat on the couch nearby, watching the news on low volume. "They're showing it again," she said gently. "The part where you said this wasn't about you?" Malik didn't answer at first. He just rubbed Ezra's back in slow circles, breathing in the scent of his son's hair. Then, "Finally," he said, "I didn't plan to speak." Lillian looked at him. "I know. I was tired. I just wanted to get him home." "I know," she repeated. Malik looked up at the screen. His own face stared back at him, the still frame of a man caught between calm and heartbreak. "Do you think I made it worse?" he asked, quieter than before. His mother stood slowly and walked toward him, lowering herself to the floor beside her son and grandson. "No," she said firmly, "you didn't make it worse." She reached for Malik's hand. "You reminded the world what real love looks like, what restraint looks like, what it means to protect your child, not just from injury, but from invisibility." Malik swallowed hard. He didn't cry, but the weight of her words pressed against the wall inside him, cracking it a little more. Ezra stirred in his arms and made a soft, cooing sound. Lillian smiled. "See, even he knows you did right." Malik pressed a kiss to Ezra's forehead, then he closed his eyes, letting the storm outside build, while inside, a stronger peace began to take root. The knock came gently at 9 to 12 the next morning. Malik hadn't slept much. He had spent the night on the living room floor again, his arm curled protectively around Ezra as they both lay under a cotton blanket. The rhythm of his son's breath had kept him grounded, even as the outside world spun faster. When Malik opened the front door of their modest row house, Alden Reyes was waiting. The federal compliance officer stood in a dark blazer and jeans, his expression calm, but purposeful. In one hand, he held a plain folder. In the other, a paper bag that smelled faintly of cinnamon and coffee. "I brought pastries," Alden said, lifting the bag, "and something stronger than whatever's in your kitchen." Malik blinked at him, unsure whether to laugh or just nod. He stepped aside and let the man in. "Appreciated," Malik said. The small kitchen was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional squeak from the baby monitor. Lillian was upstairs napping with Ezra. For now, they had a moment of peace. Alden sat across from Malik and placed the folder between them. "I'm off the clock," he said first, "but I didn't want this to go through the system without showing you what's happening." He opened the folder. Inside were copies of transcripts, screenshots of flight crew interviews, FAA internal logs, and a copy of the initial witness report. At the top of one page, Malik saw his own name typed in bold block letters: Malik Rowan, age 33, occupation unknown. Race black? Alden watched his eyes. "Even now," he said quietly, "your profession was left blank because nobody asked. They were too focused on incident liability." Malik stared at the page. "I'm a teacher," he finally said. "History, high school." Alden nodded. "I know. I looked you up myself." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card, not his federal one, but personal. "Use this if anyone tries to spin the story. You're not alone in this." Malik turned the card slowly in his fingers. Then he looked up. "Why does this matter to you?" Alden leaned back in the chair. "Because I've seen too many complaints get lost in polite dismissal. I've seen entire families talked down from truth by paperwork and process, but you stood there with your child, and you didn't let them frame you. That matters." Malik let the words settle. He hadn't asked to matter, but now it seemed he did, and that, more than anything, terrified him. He pressed his hand to his chest for a moment, grounding himself. He wasn't someone who enjoyed the spotlight. He had avoided politics his whole life, preferring to teach his students how to think critically rather than tell them what to think. Now, his own name had become a symbol, a name that others were saying aloud, a name that no longer felt just like his. Later that afternoon, Malik returned to his phone, finally opening the hundreds of unread messages, emails, and notifications that had piled up. One video had been shared over 700,000 times, a clip of him saying, "This isn't about me. It's about how systems protect themselves at the cost of dignity." Another post had paired that line with a still image of him holding Ezra on the terminal floor, the child asleep against his chest. There were comments from strangers, some grateful, some angry, some deeply personal. One woman had written, "My son was misdiagnosed in an ER because they assumed I was exaggerating. I didn't have your calm. I'm grateful you did." Another had simply said, "You gave grief dignity. Thank you." But not all voices were kind. One message had said, "You people always play the victim. It was an accident. Let it go." Another, "If the baby was white, you wouldn't be milking this." Malik stared at the screen, his hands curled slightly, then relaxed. He didn't reply. He knew better. Even silence had power when wielded with intention. He logged off and placed the phone face down. Upstairs, Ezra giggled, and Lillian called out something playful. Life, still beating, still unfolding. But the weight of the world was now tethered to his name. That evening, as twilight dusted the row houses in orange and lavender, Malik stepped onto the porch and sat on the top step. The quiet was welcome. Cars passed in the distance. A kid bounced a basketball on the next block. Then footsteps approached. He looked up to see a young woman walking slowly toward him with a toddler in her arms. She paused at the bottom of the steps. "Are you Mr. Rowan?" she asked gently. "I am. I just wanted to say, thank you." Malik stood. The woman shifted the toddler slightly, revealing a faded burn scar along the child's left arm. "This happened last year," she said. "Different airline, same excuse, no media, no justice, just silence." Malik nodded slowly. "I'm sorry," he said. She smiled, but her eyes were tired. "You reminded me that we don't always have to scream to be heard. Sometimes we just need to stand still and let people see." They shook hands, and for a moment, the porch held a kind of quiet holiness. After she left, Malik returned inside and found Ezra asleep on the rug, a soft, stuffed bear tucked in beside him. Malik sat beside his son, watching the peaceful rise and fall of his chest. He thought of names again. How people tried to define you. How systems tried to erase you. How some names became hashtags, and some names disappeared. But here, in the dim quiet of a house lit by love and resistance, Malik whispered one name softly into the air. Ezra. He said it with intention, with tenderness, with protection, with hope. And in saying it, he reminded himself of what mattered most. Not the spotlight, not the noise, not even the justice he pursued, but the promise to raise a child who would never have to question the value of his name. The following Monday began not with noise, but with a question. It came from a student, one of Malik's juniors, who raised her hand during homeroom. "Mr. Rowan, are you going to be on the news again?" The classroom fell into a hush. Malik looked up from the attendance list, caught mid-mark, his pen hovering above a name. He blinked once, twice, then smiled gently. "I don't know," he replied. Another student piped up from the back. "My mom cried watching your video. She said it reminded her of when I was born early, and no one believed her pain." The girl's voice wavered, but she didn't look away. Malik set down the pen. There were 27 students in that room. Posters on the wall, the smell of old textbooks in the corners, windows cracked just enough to let the city's autumn air drift in. But in that moment, Malik wasn't standing in front of a class. He was standing in front of a generation. He took a slow breath. What happened on that flight wasn't just about one person, he said. It was about how we treat each other when no one's watching, about what's excused and what's ignored. One boy raised his hand and asked, "Did they ever say sorry?" Malik smiled, but there was weight behind it. "No, not yet." The bell rang, breaking the moment. Papers rustled, backpacks zipped, but the energy had shifted. Something invisible and rooted now lingered in that room. Malik didn't chase it. He let it settle. Sometimes movements don't begin with shouting. Sometimes they begin in silence and in classrooms. That afternoon, a woman named Dr. Reena Patel stood before a panel of federal investigators. She didn't flinch when asked whether she believed Monarch Sky had acted in bad faith. She simply said they acted with self-preservation, not humanity. The room, filled with suits and screens and silent tension, fell still. Outside, media vans idled. Inside, testimonies unfolded. Alden Reyes with his calm recollection. 2 more passengers with written statements. Even Jonas Fields, the young flight attendant who had been kind to Malik, submitted an email titled, "What We Saw But Said Nothing About." It spread, like wind over dry grass, across college campuses. Students began taping paper coffee cups to bulletin boards, each one scribbled with the words, "Silence is not neutral." In barber shops, conversations turned toward what it meant to be calm while Black in America. How composure didn't spare you, only made your pain easier for others to ignore. And in homes, quiet moments unfolded between fathers and daughters, mothers and sons, as families watched the video together and asked the same unspoken question, would anyone have believed us meanwhile? Monarch Sky's boardroom had gone from damage control to identity crisis. "We underestimated him," Mara Jennings said during a late-night strategy session. "We thought this would fade. It hasn't, because he won't play along." Elliot Vance added, "He doesn't give interviews. He doesn't sell the story. He just exists, with purpose." The team sat in tense silence. Their brand was no longer just a logo or a jingle. It was now attached to an incident, a name, a face, and not just any face. A face that reflected thousands of others, somewhere outside that sterile boardroom. Malik was pushing Ezra in a stroller through a park. It was a rare free day. His school had granted him temporary leave for healing. As the letter had said, he wasn't sure what healing looked like yet, but he was trying. Leaves crunched underfoot. Ezra squealed at a dog running by. The world, somehow, kept turning. A woman sitting on a nearby bench gave Malik a small nod. He recognized her vaguely, not a neighbor, but someone who had probably seen the video, read the article, heard the story. She didn't come up. She didn't interrupt. She just acknowledged, and Malik nodded back. That was enough, for now. Back home. Lillian had left a note on the counter, went to grab groceries, left you some stew, rest if you can. Mom. Malik poured himself a small bowl, sat by the window, let the sunlight warm his face. His phone buzzed again. He ignored it. Then it buzzed again and again. He reached for it, more out of curiosity than urgency. It was a message from a former student. Hey, Mr. R., I'm in law school now. Just wanted to say, watching you reminded me why I'm here. You didn't just teach us history. You lived it. He read it twice. Then a second message arrived. They're organizing a walkout at Monarch Sky's employee hub in Norfolk. Some of the staff are calling for the flight attendant's permanent dismissal. Said it's not just about one incident, it's the culture. Malik leaned back, letting the words wash over him. He didn't ask for a movement. He had only asked for dignity. But sometimes, when you plant something honest in hard soil, it grows anyway. Later that evening, Ezra fell asleep early. Lillian was knitting in the living room, and Malik found himself at his desk, a stack of unfinished lesson plans to his left, and a blinking cursor on his screen. He opened a blank document and began typing a letter not to the airline, not to the press, but to his students. Dear scholars, what you see in the world may not always reflect who you are. That's why it's your job to reflect something better. You will be tested not by fire, but by silence, by moments when speaking up feels dangerous, when staying calm feels invisible. But remember this, even the quiet carry power, even the still resist. He paused, then continued. Your voice doesn't have to be the loudest, it only has to be true. He signed it simply, Mr. Rowan, and hit save. The next day, that letter would be printed on classroom walls, shared across educator networks, even read aloud on a podcast hosted by a teacher in Oakland, who said she had never cried reading a memo until that one. Change didn't arrive like thunder. It arrived like breath, like a name remembered, like a story told softly enough that it sank deep and stayed. The day the letter reached Malik's inbox, he was feeding Ezra mashed bananas and whispering the alphabet between spoonfuls. It had been a quiet morning, the kind he used to crave, simple, undisturbed. Now it felt like a pause before thunder. The subject line was sterile re-internal decision notification, Flight 604. He almost didn't open it, but silence is a kind of answer too, and Malik had learned enough in the last few days to stop turning away. He tapped the screen. The email opened with formal language, careful tone. Monarch Sky's legal team had concluded their internal investigation. The outcome, the airline acknowledged a service mishap resulting in injury. There was no admission of bias, no admission of negligence, no direct mention of Brent Halvers, the attendant who had poured scalding coffee on Ezra's legs. Instead, they offered him a settlement, $10,000, and a free flight voucher. Malik stared at the screen. $10,000 for trauma, for silence, for permission to move on without holding anyone accountable, for pretending it had never happened. Ezra giggled as banana smeared across his cheeks. Lillian, watching from the hallway, saw the flicker in Malik's face, the muscle in his jaw tightening, the stillness that followed. He didn't curse, didn't shout, but his silence filled the room like thunderclouds. Lillian stepped in slowly and took the spoon from him. "I've got it," she said softly. Malik nodded once, then walked out the back door. He stood on the porch in the chill autumn air, hands deep in his pockets, staring at the sky. It was a flat gray, no birds, no motion, only the faint hum of traffic from the boulevard 2 blocks down. He was tired of being composed, of crafting every word so it couldn't be twisted, of the balance between anger and restraint. He pulled out his phone, opened the email again, and stared at it for a full minute. Then he replied, "Thank you for your offer. I decline. This isn't about money. This is about accountability." He pressed send. He felt nothing at first. Then something shifted, like weightlifting from a part of his chest he didn't realize had been carrying it. He went inside, kissed Ezra on the forehead, and held him close. Lillian didn't say a word. She simply rested a hand on his back and let the silence be sacred. The next morning, news broke. A whistleblower from within Monarch Sky had leaked internal memos. Screenshots revealed discussions about public relations, potential lawsuits, and, most damning of all, whether Malik could be discredited politely and legally if he pushed further. The phrase that caught fire was simple. If he won't take the money, we'll make him question his own memory. It went viral in hours. Talk shows picked it up. Podcasts replayed it. Civil rights organizations issued formal statements. But it wasn't the media frenzy that hit Malik hardest. It was the message from a former co-worker. Her name was Faith. She had taught beside him 3 years ago at his previous school. They hadn't spoken in nearly a year. "Malik, I saw what they wrote. My brother died in custody because no one believed him. Keep going. We need your voice." He sat in his car after reading that, hands on the steering wheel, the engine off, a quiet ache building in his throat. He hadn't meant to lead anything. He had only meant to protect his son. And now people were looking at him like a lighthouse. But he still felt like a man trying not to drown. That night, he sat at his desk and wrote again. Not for the world this time, but for Ezra. He opened a blank page and titled it, "For When You're Old Enough." Then he wrote, "You were too small to remember this, Ezra. But I need you to know why your name matters. You were hurt, not just by heat, but by the way they turned away. And I couldn't fix that pain. But I could name it, and I could carry it without letting it define you. That is what strength is, son. Not what they tell you in movies. Not what power tries to sell. It is naming the thing that tried to make you small and stand in any way. I hope the world you grow into is softer than this one. But if it isn't, I hope you know the softness inside you is not weakness. It is resistance, and it is beautiful." He saved the letter and backed it up 3 times. Then he returned to the living room, where Ezra was asleep with his head on Lillian's lap. A kid's cartoon played in the background, but Lillian wasn't watching. She was studying her grandson's face, her eyes unreadable. She looked up as Malik approached. "I thought you said this would blow over." He sat beside her. "I did. You were wrong. I know." She stroked Ezra's curls and said quietly, "You're going to change things." He shook his head. "No, I'm just holding space for the truth. That's how change begins." The next day, a call came from the office of Congresswoman Letitia Granger. She was a veteran lawmaker and civil rights advocate. Her aide asked if Malik would be willing to testify before a transportation subcommittee reviewing airline discrimination protocols. He didn't answer right away. He looked down at Ezra, who was reaching for his toes on the playmat. Then he said, "Yes, not for the cameras, not for the press, but because he had learned something about the cost of being seen. It meant scrutiny. It meant fatigue. It meant carrying not only your pain, but the pain of others who had never been given a microphone. But it also meant truth had a witness, and sometimes that was the difference between legacy and erasure. The hearing room was colder than Malik expected, not physically, but in mood. It was the kind of cold born from formality, from polished wood surfaces and tightly pressed suits, from carefully measured language that concealed as much as it revealed. Rows of journalists sat like vultures on the sidelines. Camera crews flanked the back walls. Congressional aides shuffled documents, whispered updates, and checked their watches. And at the front of the long, curved desk, the Transportation Subcommittee of the United States Congress prepared to hear testimony. Malik adjusted his tie. He wasn't used to wearing one anymore. The collar itched slightly at the base of his neck. His hands were steady, but his stomach reminded him he hadn't eaten. Still, his back remained straight. Beside him sat Alden Reyes, serving as an informal advisor and quiet ally. On the other side was a civil rights attorney from the ACLU, Nadira Thompson, a woman with steel in her eyes and calm in her voice. Malik hadn't planned to be here, but here he was. Mr. Rowan. "You may begin," said Congresswoman Letitia Granger from the center chair. He stood. The room quieted. The microphones were live, and every eye in the room turned to him. He took a breath, then another, then he began. "My name is Malik Rowan. I'm a high school teacher. I'm also a father. 2 weeks ago, I boarded Monarch Sky Flight 604 with my infant son, Ezra. I thought it would be a routine trip. I thought being calm and quiet would protect us. I was wrong." He paused, let the silence settle, then continued. "What happened on that flight wasn't just a spill. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a moment that revealed what happens when systems stop seeing people as people. My son was burned. The flight attendant never looked me in the eye after it happened. The crew called security before offering an apology. The room was still. One of the congressmen shifted slightly, clearly uncomfortable. Malik pressed forward. I stayed calm. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't curse. And still, they treated me like a problem to be contained, like a threat, because I was a black man holding a crying child in first class. There was a murmur from the press table, but no interruption. I'm not here to destroy Monarch Sky. I'm here because my son deserves better, and because so do the people who won't ever be invited to speak here." He sat down. A long silence followed. Then Congresswoman Granger spoke. "Thank you, Mr. Rowan. Your composure is remarkable." Malik nodded once. A few more witnesses followed. A former flight attendant who had been fired for challenging biased policies. A mother whose autistic son had been removed from a flight after having a panic attack. Each story built on the last. Then came the questions. Congressman Drew Carver, a stiff man from Indiana, leaned into his mic. "Mr. Rowan," he began, "do you believe this incident was intentionally racially motivated, or was it an unfortunate but isolated accident?" Malik looked at him evenly. "I believe bias doesn't always announce itself, Congressman, but it leaves patterns of who is helped and who is handled." Carver frowned slightly. "So you're saying this wasn't personal? I'm saying it's systemic, and that makes it personal for all of us." Nadira gave a small approving nod beside him. The hearing stretched on. By the end, Malik felt the weight of his words pressing on his shoulders, but it wasn't exhaustion. It was something else, something like ownership. After the final gavel struck, people began to file out. Reporters approached him in a wave, but Nadira stepped in. "No comments today," she said firmly. Outside, the sunlight felt too bright, too loud. Malik stood on the steps of the Capitol building, breathing it in. The air smelled of concrete, cameras, and cold ambition. He closed his eyes for a moment, and in that moment, a memory returned Ezra's small hand gripping his shirt as the coffee spilled. His instinct to shield, not shout. The sheer panic wrapped in silence. He had never wanted this stage, but now that he was on it, he knew what to do. He would speak for the people who didn't get microphones. That evening, after returning home, Lillian greeted him with a hug that said more than words ever could. Ezra babbled in the living room, pointing at cartoons on the screen and clapping randomly. Dinner was quiet, comforting, roast chicken and sweet potatoes. As Malik helped clean the dishes, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Jonas Fields, the junior flight attendant who had helped him during the flight. "Hey, Mr. Rowan, I gave a statement today. Told them the truth, that Brent Halvers had 2 previous complaints for aggressive behavior and that senior staff covered it up. Just wanted you to know." Malik stared at the screen for a long moment, then replied, "Thank you. That took courage." Another buzz came seconds later, this time from an unknown number. He opened it. "Mr. Rowan, I was the nurse in the terminal. I treated Ezra. I've been watching from the sidelines, hoping someone would name what happened. You did. You reminded us that dignity can be louder than outrage. Thank you." The message ended with her name, Claire Drummond. He put the phone down and sat on the couch. Ezra crawled into his lap, tugging at the collar of his shirt. "Da-da," he said, then yawned. Malik smiled and held him close. He didn't need headlines. He didn't need applause. He just needed this boy to grow up in a world where his body, his voice, and his story were not considered disruptions. Later that night, Malik walked out onto the porch. The street was quiet. A dog barked a few blocks away. The moon hung low, golden and wide. He looked up, then he whispered to the air, not sure who was listening. "You're not just my son, Ezra. You're my reason." Behind him, in the quiet house, the news was playing. They were showing the hearing, quoting his testimony, highlighting his refusal to settle, calling it the beginning of a cultural reckoning. But Malik didn't hear it. He had already said what mattered, and now the rest of the world had to catch up. The email arrived just after midnight. Malik was up, rocking Ezra back to sleep. The baby had been restless that evening, crying off and on, as if sensing that the world outside their small home was stirring louder than usual. The message was from Monarch Sky's new interim CEO. Her name was Evelyn Chase, recently appointed after Elliot Vance stepped down amid pressure from board members and public outcry. The message was short but deliberate. "Mr. Rowan, I would like to request a private conversation. No cameras, no lawyers, just 2 people who care about what happens next. I believe we are at a turning point. If you're willing to meet, I'll come to you. Respectfully, Evelyn Chase." Malik read it twice. Then again, he hadn't expected this. Lillian watched him from the hallway, her arms crossed, her robe wrapped tightly around her. "They're trying to clean up," she said flatly. "Probably," Malik replied. "But maybe," she added softly. Someone in that room finally grew a conscience. He didn't answer. He looked down at Ezra, finally asleep in his arms. One small hand curled around Malik's shirt collar. The next day, Malik agreed to the meeting. They met in a modest coffee shop on the edge of town, far from reporters, far from noise. The kind of place that smelled like old wood, espresso, and familiarity. Evelyn arrived in a long navy coat, no assistants, no briefcase, just a folder tucked beneath her arm and a face that looked older than the photos online. They sat by the window. Malik didn't speak first. Evelyn folded her hands. "I won't pretend this isn't partially about reputation," she began. "But I also won't insult you with PR language. What happened to your son never should have happened." Malik nodded once. "I agree." She exhaled. "The problem," she said, "is that our company's rot goes deeper than one man's mistake. Brent Halvers was a symptom, not the disease." Malik studied her. "Then say that publicly." "I intend to," she said, "but before I do, I wanted you to know. We've terminated 4 employees, not just Halvers, but supervisors who buried past complaints, HR managers who minimized similar incidents. We're restructuring our entire training and bias protocol." Malik was silent. Evelyn looked tired but earnest. "I know none of this erases Ezra's pain," she said quietly, "but if I'm going to take over a broken system, I want to build something better, not for headlines, but for the passengers who won't get this kind of attention." Malik leaned forward. "Words won't fix this, but actions might." Evelyn reached into her folder. She slid over a document. It was a formal invitation for Malik to join Monarch Sky's Civil Advisory Council, an external watchdog group with full access to audits, policies, and internal investigations. They offered no paycheck, just access, voice, and the right to publicly report what he saw. "This isn't a gift," she said. "It's accountability, and you've earned the right to help shape it." Malik stared at the paper. It felt heavy, not with pressure, but with meaning. He didn't answer right away. Later that night, after Ezra had been put to bed, Malik sat at the kitchen table with Lillian, the document in front of him. "You don't have to say yes," she said gently. "I know. You didn't ask to be their conscience. I know. But maybe," she added, "it's not about what you were asked to do. Maybe it's about what you're ready for." He looked down at his hands. They weren't shaken. They weren't tired. They were steady. "I never wanted to lead anything," he murmured. "Most real leaders don't," Lillian said. That night, he signed the agreement. The next morning, it was made public, and that's when the real fire started. Headlines exploded again. Some praised him. Others accused him of selling out. There were posts that called him a hero. Others called him a traitor for working with the system that had hurt him. One post read, "Another black man brought in to make people feel better while nothing actually changes." Another, "Respect to Malik. But this feels like a bandage on a broken bone." The noise was deafening, but Malik didn't respond. He just showed up. The next 3 weeks were filled with meetings, policy reviews, and listening sessions with former flight staff, advocacy groups, and passengers who shared stories that had never made the news. Stories of being ignored, stories of being watched more closely for no reason, stories of fear wrapped in politeness. And Malik listened. Not as an expert, but as someone who finally understood the weight of fire when it started small, silent, smoldering, and then spread when no one was watching. One morning, during a review session, he met a former passenger named Gerald, A middle-aged man, quiet voice, thick glasses. He'd flown Monarch Sky the previous year. I watched a woman get escorted off because her baby cried too long, Gerald said. They called it a disruption. She was black, and no one said a word, not even me. Malik looked him in the eye. Why are you telling me now? Gerald shrugged. Because when you stood still and didn't yell, I saw what strength could look like, and I realized silence wasn't neutral anymore. That night, Malik returned home and took Ezra out for a walk. The sky was soft with stars, the streetlights casting golden pools across the sidewalks. He pushed the stroller slowly. Ezra looked up at him with sleepy eyes, murmuring a lullaby half-remembered. Malik thought of how many people now knew his son's name, how many had projected their hopes, anger, healing, or cynicism onto one child's pain, and he thought of what fire could be not just destruction, but light, heat, transformation. He looked down at Ezra. We're not done, he whispered, but we're not alone either. And under the quiet hush of the evening, a father and son walked forward, carrying both wound and purpose. The day of the press conference began like any other. Malik woke early, before sunrise. Ezra was already stirring in his crib, making soft, sleepy noises as the first pale light crept through the blinds. Lillian was in the kitchen, already brewing coffee. The smell of cinnamon toast drifted into the hallway. You don't have to go, you know, she said gently, placing a plate in front of him. I know, he replied, but you will anyway. He gave her a tired smile, not because I owe them, but because I owe him. He nodded toward Ezra's room. The conference was set to take place at Elmsway International, in the newly constructed Monarch Sky Equity Hall, a glass-walled atrium that overlooked the very runway where, months before, Malik had stood, clutching his scalded son, his dignity bruised but unshaken. Now he would return, not as a victim, but as a witness and a builder of something new. When he arrived, the cameras were already lining the gates. The media buzzed, reporters rehearsing sound bites, adjusting lapel mics, and swarming anyone in a suit. Inside, rows of seats had been arranged for families, activists, flight crew, and leadership. Monarch Sky banners flanked the sides of the atrium, next to a tall standing sign that read Flight 604 from Incident to Impact. Malik took a slow breath. Jonas Fields, the young flight attendant who had supported him during the ordeal, met him near the podium. You sure about this? Jonas asked. Not remotely, Malik said with a faint smile, but that never stopped me before. A few rows away, Evelyn Chase stood quietly, reviewing her notes. When their eyes met, she gave him a respectful nod. At exactly 11, the room fell into a hush. Evelyn stepped up first. She opened with facts, the number of disciplinary actions taken, the settlements reached, the policy changes implemented. She announced that Monarch Sky was rolling out an independent racial bias auditing system and a permanent civil advisory council, Malik's name listed first among its founding members. But then she paused, and she did something few expected. She stepped aside and motioned for Malik to speak. He approached the podium. The room quieted again. Cameras clicked softly in the distance. Ezra sat in the front row on Lillian's lap, bundled in a navy sweater with little white clouds stitched across the chest. Malik adjusted the microphone and began. I was not supposed to be here. Not in front of cameras. Not on a council. not as a headline. I was supposed to be another quiet story, another man of color taught to stay calm, stay polite, stay low. But when they poured scalding coffee on my son's skin, something changed, not just in me, but in the air around me. He looked down at Ezra, who was watching him with wide, curious eyes. They tried to make me smaller, but I remembered who I was. I remembered that silence doesn't keep us safe, it just keeps things hidden. He paused. A few audience members leaned forward. What happened to me and Ezra on that flight was a result of rot. Not rage. Rot is quiet. It hides behind protocol. It speaks in policies that sound neutral but fall hardest on the same bodies, over and over. He looked directly at the cameras now. This is not about one airline. This is not about one crew member. It's about what we are willing to see, and what we are willing to stop justifying. He stepped back for a moment, letting the stillness breathe. People think dignity is loud, that it shouts and demands, but dignity can also be still. It can be a father holding his son and refusing to be broken, and sometimes the world listens. He ended there. No applause followed right away, just a heavy, deep silence, the kind that settles when truth has been spoken, and no one wants to disturb it too soon. Then, slowly, hands began to clap, first one row, then another, until the entire atrium rang with it, not thunderous, but strong, steady, afterward. Malik stepped outside to find a moment of air. A few reporters approached, but he waved them off gently. He didn't need more headlines. He just needed the sky for a minute. Jonas joined him a few moments later. "You think any of this will last?" Jonas asked. Malik looked out across the tarmac. "I think people remember what made them feel human. If we keep reminding them, maybe that's enough." Later that night, back at home, Malik sat on the porch with Lillian and Ezra in his arms. The stars were scattered across the sky like stories yet to be told. Ezra giggled as Lillian handed him a soft plush plane toy someone had sent anonymously in the mail. There was a card attached. It read, "For Ezra." "So, your skies are gentler than ours were. No signature, just a gesture." Malik watched his son lift the toy into the air. Babbling sounds that didn't yet have meaning, but somehow carried all the hope of tomorrow. He felt Lillian's hand rest on his shoulder. "You did good," she whispered. He nodded, his throat too full to answer. He looked up at the sky again. And in the hush of that quiet Virginia night, Malik Rowan made a silent promise that Ezra would not be the last child to be held with dignity. He would be the first of many. And the story would not end with survival. It would begin with flight. Sometimes injustice doesn't scream, it simmers. What happened to Malik and baby Ezra wasn't just a moment of carelessness. It was a mirror reflecting something many passengers of color have felt, the quiet cruelty of being unseen. But this time, the story didn't end in silence, because Malik stood his ground, because someone in row 2 chose not to look away, and because love for one small child lit a fire across an entire system. This isn't just about one flight or one airline. It's about every small moment of bias we excuse, every act of silence that gives power to discrimination, and every time someone like Malik chooses grace when the world gives them every reason not to. So, what do we take from this? Maybe it's that true strength is soft-spoken. Maybe it's that change starts with ordinary people who choose to act. And maybe it's that the next time we see someone being mistreated, We won't stay seated. We'll stand with them. If this story touched your heart, like, share, and subscribe so these stories can reach more people who need to hear them. And stay with us, because the next story might just be the one that changes the way you see the world. We'll see you in the next episode.